Politically, the world was precariously balanced. Europe's great powers were entangled in a web of alliances. The arms race was accelerating. Nationalism was on the rise. Science and technology were increasingly intertwined, with state power advances in chemistry and physics, promised new medicines and machines, but also hinted at more efficient tools of war. Culturally, the faith in scientific progress was at its peak. Many believed that the rational mastery of nature's forces would inevitably lead to human betterment. Yet others, particularly in artistic and philosophical circles, were beginning to question whether such power could be wielded without moral corruption. For Marie Curie, science was never an abstract pursuit. It was a calling intertwined with both hope and foreboding. She had already seen the medical potential of radium in treating cancer, but she was also living proof of its toll. Chronic fatigue, burns on her hands, and a persistent sense of physical decline. Still, she resisted calls to patent her radium isolation process, believing that scientific discoveries should belong to all humanity, not be monopolized for profit. Her ethos was one of service to knowledge, guided by a moral compass that placed truth and human benefit above personal gain. It is in this atmosphere of triumph, shadowed by risk, of a world teetering between enlightenment and catastrophe, that we might imagine her writing a letter to the people of the future. Whether such a letter was ever truly penned or merely reconstructed from fragments of her thoughts, it fits seamlessly with the concerns that marked her life in 1910. The double-edged nature of discovery, the weight of responsibility, borne by those who first glimpse a new force of nature, and the uncertainty of how future generations will choose to wield it. Here was a woman who, in the span of less than 2 decades, had risen from obscurity to become the only person ever to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences. She was lauded and attacked, celebrated and slandered, a figure both luminous and solitary. Her laboratory was her sanctuary, but also a crucible in which the blessings and curses of modern science fused into something potent and irreversible. If she looked ahead across the decades, she would have seen possibilities as vast as the atom itself: healing, energy, illumination, and dangers equally immense: destruction, contamination, moral, decay.
To the people of the future, I write to you, unknown heirs of our discoveries, from a laboratory where the invisible forces of nature are slowly unveiled. My work with radium and polonium has opened a door to powers both wondrous and perilous, and I feel compelled to warn you, though I know not who you are or when you will read this. The glow of radium is beautiful, but it burns. It heals, but it destroys. You may live in an age where the secrets of the atom are harnessed, where energy flows like rivers from the elements. But I beseech you to wield this power with care. I have seen its miracles, cancers treated, darkness illuminated, but I have also felt its poison in my bones. Science is not a god to be worshipped, but a tool to be guided by wisdom. What will you make of it? Will you use it to light the world, or to cast it into shadow? I write this letter, though it may never leave my desk, for I fear the world is not yet ready to hear. My discoveries are young, and their consequences vast. If you read this, know that I was driven not by ambition, but by a thirst for truth. Guard that truth. Protect it from those who would twist it for gain or destruction. I entrust it to you, my unknown successors, to carry forward with courage and humility. Yours, in the service of science, Marie Curie.
After 1910, Marie Curie's life unfolded under a complex blend of triumph, scrutiny, and relentless work. In 1911, she was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for her discovery of polonium and radium, making her the first and still the only person to receive Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences. Yet this honor arrived during a storm. The Langevin affair, splashed across scandal-hungry newspapers, sought to portray her not as a scientist, but as a foreign temptress. The vitriol was sharpened by xenophobia. She was still seen by many as a Polish outsider, and by the prevailing discomfort with a woman occupying the highest ranks of scientific achievement. She weathered the attacks with stoic dignity, refusing to withdraw from the Nobel ceremony despite being advised to avoid public humiliation. That determination unyielding, proud, was part of what had carried her from Warsaw to the pinnacle of science. But the wounds of public shaming never entirely faded. It is easy to imagine that such experiences contributed to a certain caution when it came to sharing deeply personal reflections like the letter to the people of the future. She had seen how the public could distort and weaponize words. When the First World War erupted in 1914, Curie turned her energies towards saving lives. She developed and equipped mobile X-ray units, known as Petites Curies, and trained nurses, including her own daughter Irene, to operate them on the front lines. She personally drove one of the units into battle zones, believing that the humanitarian applications of science were the highest form of service. It was also during this period that the first serious signs of the toll radiation had taken on her health. Began to appear persistent fatigue, aching joints, and anemia. Still, she pressed on. In the post-war years, she directed the newly established Radium Institute in Paris, balancing administrative leadership with research. She traveled extensively, including a celebrated 1,921 trip to the United States, where she was presented with a gram of radium purchased through a fundraising campaign led by American women. Always practical, she refused luxury or ceremony for its own sake. She was far more interested in laboratory equipment than in social accolades. Yet in private, she was aware of the dual nature of her discoveries. She had seen radium bring hope to cancer patients, but she also knew of laboratory workers developing burns, lesions, and illnesses from exposure. By the 1920s, the glow of radium was no longer an unquestioned symbol of progress. Cases of radium jaw among dial painters and other industrial workers were beginning to appear in the press. Curie herself avoided public comment on the growing controversy, perhaps fearing that any acknowledgement might tarnish the field she had helped to create or undermine the careful optimism she believed was essential for scientific progress. This reticence may explain why a letter warning future generations about the dangers of radioactivity was never released. The early 20th century public was still largely enthralled by the marvel of radiation. Cautionary words from the very figure who had brought it to the world might have been met with skepticism, even hostility. Worse, they could have been twisted into anti-scientific sentiment, used to fuel fear and superstition rather than thoughtful regulation. Marie Curie's instinct was always to protect the integrity of science, even if that meant holding back her own personal misgivings from the glare of public opinion. In her later years, her health steadily declined. The long hours in unshielded laboratories handling test tubes of radium salts that she sometimes kept in her desk drawers, had damaged her bone marrow beyond repair. Yet she rarely complained and never expressed regret for the work itself. She continued to teach, to mentor younger scientists, especially women, and to promote the idea that science must be guided by ethical purpose. In one of her last recorded sentiments, she said, "One never notices what has been done. One can only see what remains to be done." It was a worldview that refused to dwell on past accolades or failures, always leaning toward the horizon. Marie Curie died on July 4, 1934, in the French Alps, of aplastic anemia, almost certainly caused by her prolonged exposure to ionizing radiation. She was 66 years old. Even in her final months, she maintained the quiet discipline that had defined her life, working when she could, and keeping her private reflections largely to herself. Her papers and personal effects remain so contaminated with radium that they are stored in lead-lined boxes, a literal testament to the enduring and dangerous legacy of her discoveries. If we imagine her unpublished letter resting in a drawer, it becomes almost a metaphor for her relationship with the moral weight of her work, a voice of warning held in reserve, perhaps waiting for a time when the world was ready to listen without fear or distortion. She lived in an age when the line between hope and peril in science was especially thin, and she knew that a careless word could tip the balance. In the end, Marie Curie's life stands as both an inspiration and a caution. Inspiration in her unshakable pursuit of knowledge despite poverty, prejudice, and personal loss. Caution in the knowledge that every scientific breakthrough carries within it the seed of misuse. Science, she understood, is not an abstract force. It is an extension of human will. The power to split atoms, to cure diseases, to illuminate the night, is inseparable from the power to destroy cities, to poison bodies, to darken the future. Her legacy asks something simple yet profound of those who inherit her discoveries: to pair curiosity with conscience, ambition with humility. The light of radium, like all human knowledge, can guide or it can blind. Which it becomes is not determined by the elements themselves, but by the wisdom or folly of those who hold them in their hands.